So this is the easy talk, right? And hopefully this will be the one that will generate some discussion. But, you know, this is what we want to do, right? Okay, we want this. And, you know, this guy is pretty happy about the fact he knows how to ventilate this lung, isn't he? He is pretty chuffed about what he's doing there. He knows what. It's not this easy in clinical practice because we can't see our lung. So I'm going to talk a bit about optimising high frequency, and I've changed the title somewhat to say in the recruitable lung, because lung recruitment can be only done in a lung that it will respond to recruitment. You can't do lung recruitment in a lung that has the wrong disease for that. So we have to be very aware that the rider here, the legal disclaimer is this is an approach to high frequency which is only relevant to lung diseases associated with atelectasis or recruitability. Right, and the people from Calgary have to keep their mouths shut. So I gave them this case. So this is one of our babies. Just shows we do at the surgical units occasionally manage babies with active lung disease. So here we have a baby, 28 weeks, intubated early, on conventional ventilator, pre-surfactant. We have a mean airway pressure on the conventional of 12. We're in 100% oxygen. Our SAT's preductally at 86, and we have a CO2 which is on the upper end of high for what we accept, and we have clearly a big oxygenation problem. So we have ventilation oxygenation. Okay, we're in an enlightened high frequency environment. So we're going to put this baby on the oscillator. Let's not argue about whether or not we should put this baby on the oscillator, because it will make the talk rather boring if we all decide not to oscillate the baby. Okay? And so assume we're going to oscillate this baby. What mean airway pressure are we going to pick? Because this is a talk about mean airway pressure. And the Calgary guys have to keep quiet.
If you have the chance to have an X-ray, it will be the best thing to show for us to see where we are.
Who would do an X-ray before they put the baby on the oscillator?
Makes sense. I would like to know what the conventional pulmonary mechanics were before, because if this were just pure pulmonary hypertension.
No. So there's no pre and post ductal difference, and your compliance. No, you've got a compliance of 0.32 mil per kilo per centimetre of water. Okay? And you will have, assume the people depend on what country you're in, right? But let's assume we have a PEEP of 5 to 6. That's going to give you a reasonably high delta P there to get that. And we've set our I time efficiently. Okay? Okay? So we have a problem of compliance, and we don't yet have a problem of pulmonary hypertension. This is a fresh HMD type picture. So we may...
have X-ray, we eventually can go like 1 or 2.
So are you doing the X-ray to get the right mean airway pressure, or to work out that you don't have an alternative pathology like an thorax?
Yeah, like mostly to rule out any other complication for the baby's not oxygenated. And
Okay.
then we have some
So that's not,
how the
I
lungs
agree.
are expand or how is the volume or whatever.
I'm going
If I
to put
don't
it to
have-
you that X-ray is actually not a very good way of delineating fine changes in lung volume. We talked about this in Calgary. There's actually, at least in high frequency, very few studies on the ability of X-ray, despite us using it ubiquitously. Right? And I think there's only 2. I know of one in detail, and it showed a very poor correlation between absolute lung volume and single measures on X-ray, such as counting the ribs, lucency of the lung. So the translation, and then they got better if you combined all of them together. But the message, the take-home message is, from me anyway, is that chest X-ray is very good at telling you you've got a really, really low lung volume, profound atelectasis. It's very good at telling you you're about right. It's very good at telling you you're grossly overdistended, you know, the flat ribs, the bulging stuff. It's not very good at telling you that you should use 12 instead of 14. Yeah. It also has some practical limitations. It's not something that's really point of care bedside related. You have to get someone to wheel up something to the unit, take a photo, then you need to look at it and make a change. You're going to have to wait again, and of course, at least in our hospital, they need to go back down to PICU, because PICU is much more powerful in our hospital. So if they want X-ray, they go to X-ray, right? So then you have to wait for them to come back. So there's practical limitations. And also, I'm going to hopefully convince you that the things you can get from the X-ray are already there at the bedside. the baby is poorly ventilated and atelectatic or over-distended, there's enough information in the bedside that will help you know that. And the X-ray is a confirmatory tool and a diagnostic tool for other pathologies, in my view. What do you think? I'm going to keep asking the expert.
If you think as a physician that what you see with this baby actually is what you would expect, because the baby is preterm, no anti-steroids, you would expect the baby RDS, then I would probably not make the X-ray. On the other hand, if you say, well, these settings are actually quite strange. This is a lot of oxygen. Maybe there is some pulmonary hypertension. Maybe this is a baby with ruptured membranes for, let's say, more than normal. Then it wouldn't be a good idea to actually make the X-ray to make sure that you see the white lung, that it is a recruitable lung before starting to recruit this lung. So I would be cautious and let your own gut feeling tell you, oh no, this is really RDS and this is probably too low pressure than the conventional, and I need to proceed with high frequency to recruit the lung.
But again, it's a diagnostic tool.
Right.
It's not a volumetric assessment tool. I think that's important. Let's assume the baby had an X-ray and had the X-ray that I showed. Oh, sorry, had the X-ray we saw before.
I was just going to say, wouldn't you be concerned about putting the baby on the oscillator prior to giving surfactant?
That's an excellent question, and we'll come back to that one after, because
Sorry, that was my
I think that's an important question, and I'm going to show an approach that is what we've been doing, an approach that Anton has been doing for longer than us, which is pre-surfactant, and maybe at the end, hopefully we'll have time to discuss the rationales of each thing, and there is a group in Europe that will do it differently. They would give surfactant now, or at least if we're on the oscillator before they do recruitment, they would give surfactant. But I'm going to show you the approach of going to the oscillator, doing recruitment, then giving surfactant, and showing the effect you can get from recruitment that's non-surfactant related.
I guess that's why monitoring is so important.
Yeah.
How that this can change with direct
So, we've got the X-ray that I showed you earlier and asked you what frequency to set, okay? If you're lucky, I'll put that up, right? And what generally happens when you give these talks is everyone's too scared to commit to a setting, so we have all these things. We're going to have to we've now decided, we're committed, this baby's going on the oscillator, okay? What mean airway pressure are you going to set?
1 or 2 points above the mean that we were ventilating.
So, 1 or 2 points, so 13 or 14?
13, 14.
Who would pick anything different from that?
What was the pip?
Let's the pips say 26, 27. Who would pick anything different from 13 or 14? No one. So that means if I now say who would pick 13 to 14, you'd all put your hands up? Because if you don't, then you... Yeah. Okay.
Would you not take 14 as well?
You take 40? Why?
No, 14. I mean.
Yeah, 14, yeah. Well, why 14?
So it's a recruitable lung, and then you'd like to start with the pressure just above the mean pressure you used for the conventional ventilation.
Why? This is Calgary guys that learn, and my ward round just consistently saying why or not.
You need more information because you need to know this baby's hemodynamic stability.
Yep, the baby is hemodynamically stable, has a mean blood pressure of 31. Yep. Yep.
But the idea is we try to recruit lungs, it's supposed, and we don't know what will be the pressure that the lungs will start to open. And if we use a lot of pressure,
He
it
wants
may
higher than like 18. You said you wanted 1.5 times whatever you started with.
Now that's the delta P.
no, there's nothing. 18 is a lot, so you can
Then we
burn
are
the
very
lungs.
hypertensive.
What I'm trying to get at is we're setting a number, okay, and this is a pretty important thing. We're doing this as a rescue therapy here, right? And it's a powerful tool, the oscillator. It's the most, and we should know why we're picking these numbers. So that's why I asked why, because I'm interested in what your rationale is. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just interested in why. And the reality is everyone says 2 above, right? Across outside of the Netherlands. I'm just interested in where people have learnt that from, because I can't find the study that says we should go 2 above.
Partly we think part of the machine you're choosing because there's going to be greater attenuation with small machine over another.
Yeah, but this is mean airway pressure we're
Yes.
talking about.
Yeah.
So mean airway pressure shouldn't attenuate too much, to a degree, depending on well, it depends a bit on the lung mechanics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I find if you put the kid on the sensormatics, it's going to And so that would dictate where I might choose. But then you're going to look at the FiO2. If the FiO2 can come down nicely, then you might be okay with your map. But if it's taking a while, you might need to go higher. So 2 might be a place to start with, and you might want to.
Excellent. So that's the key thing, I think, is that when you pick a number, you might be wrong. And I don't, to a certain extent, it doesn't matter what number you pick, although I probably wouldn't pick 25 and I probably wouldn't pick 3. And Anton can explain why they do something slightly differently. But it's not the number, it's what you do once you've made that decision that's the key thing. It's how you learn from the baby. So I agree, it's the initial number is just the initial.
I think that number depends on your philosophy, the logic that you use to go from conventional to oscillation.
Yeah.
If the logic that you used was rescue because your mean air pressure on conventional is high, and you think 12 is high, then you're assuming on high frequency you're going to go to high mean air pressure. And you could establish that by doing a peak trial on conventional and seeing what happens to your oscillation. If the logic that you used was high frequency prevents lung injury, then it's a different logic, and you might actually go to the same or lower mean air pressure because you're going across at a lower threshold.
I'll come back to that in a minute, because in this sort of disease, I would advocate you don't want to start. Yeah, but essentially this is at the period of time where you could have been in a first intention trial too. You could argue this is almost first intention. So anyway, the good thing is you've all raised various issues about what to do before you even pick a mean airway pressure, so that's really nice, so thank you for doing that. And then we did pick 14, and the FO2 went from 100 to 80%, and our SATs are 90. There was minimal change in our CO2, and there was some change in our PO2. So have we won? No. We're kind of winning, but we haven't really won. This isn't magically better, right? Okay. So then it comes down to where do we pick these numbers from? And I think the key thing is the word initial here. And that's where it sometimes gets lost in the clinical trial data. That the way we pick the mean airway pressure is just a starting pressure. I'm sure this doesn't. So we know from the large number of clinical trials, and if you think about in terms of ventilation trials, we've randomised more babies to first intention high frequency preterm babies than virtually any other modality comparison trial, group of trials. We know that overall there's very little difference in lung disease and chronic death, yeah? But in the early trials, there was a significant difference in adverse event outcomes. And that was due to this one large trial, the very first large randomised controlled trial of high frequency first intention, showed no real difference in pulmonary outcomes and death, but much higher rates of IVH and other parameters in the high frequency group. Why? That doesn't make sense. That's not what we'd expect. The key thing here is that this trial was intentionally designed as what was essentially a low lung volume trial, where you're trying to use mean airway pressures lower than on conventional. Okay? And maybe that is going to be the thing that's important. We already knew from animal work in the 80s that the lung volume you achieved on the oscillator was fundamentally important to the outcome of that modality. So this is a fantastic Canadian paper from the other side of the country in rabbit models. It's a bit dated now, but compared a low lung volume high frequency, a high lung volume high frequency and conventional strategy, and you can see the significant difference in the PaO2 that could be achieved using a high lung volume strategy. And indeed, lung injury was reduced in this approach rather than this approach. So we knew in the 80s that you needed to use high frequency in a way that gave you a high lung volume outcome, not a low lung volume. Mean airway pressure and lung volume are interrelated. As a general rule, if you want lung volume, you need to apply enough pressure to get that lung volume. And the conclusion from this, practically at the bedside, is that we need to set our mean to achieve and then maintain lung volume recruitment. When we then look at the clinical trials which at least intended to have a high lung volume approach, we can see that, again, there's essentially no difference, but if you believe in high frequency, there's a trend towards a benefit, okay? This forest plot depends somewhat on your belief system. But importantly, the overall outcome is being influenced by two large trials published in the same journal on the same day in similar babies, but in different countries. So one's the US trial of Sherry Courtney, and one is the UCOS trial. Interestingly, if we look at the outcome measure here, we can see that one trial showed a benefit in high frequency, one trial showed no difference, both in the same epoch in time, which is important when we look at these sort of temporal trials that have happened over decades. The old trial of the high-fly trial, apart from a different strategy, we were using conventional ventilation differently. We were using low peaks, we didn't have ubiquitous use of steroids, and surfactant was a novel therapy. This is a series of two trials that are occurring in similar babies in an era using similar adjunctive therapies, so they're somewhat comparative. So how come we got different outcomes? Again, this is a paper from Anton, who assessed these trials in a slightly different way and made a discussion around the strategies of lung protection in neonatology. And there's an important I've highlighted the high lung volume strategy trials in conventional. If we take out the Courtney, the UCOS, the Johnson's one, the important thing is what is a high lung volume strategy? It's easy to design a trial and say, I will do a high lung volume strategy. The proof is in the pudding. What is your definition of a high lung volume strategy? And generally, they're defined in terms of the target you're trying to achieve in FO2 after initiation, how you use mean airway pressure and what FO2 you're trying to achieve. They both had different targets. The Courtney trial allowed a higher FO2 on high frequency or conventional, and the Johnson trial was targeting 30%. But you can see in what was actually achieved, the Johnson trial wasn't able to get their FO2 down to what they intended to do. So the question there is, was their high lung volume strategy in intention actually the high lung volume strategy in application, as opposed to the Courtney trial, which were able to achieve their parameters. And when you break down these trials in greater detail and look at the mean airway pressures that were being used in the conventional and the high frequency group, the Courtney trial had a much higher difference in the mean airway pressure in the oscillator group compared to the conventional group than the UCOS trial did. And that higher mean airway pressure was being applied for longer. So that potentially is the difference in outcome, different approaches to mean airway pressure in these two trials. It shows that mean airway pressure will be important to high lung volume strategy and success. There was also other things with the two trials, for the use of ventilators, the pragmatic stuff, in terms of how the clinician could follow protocols. But there was a difference in mean airway pressure being achieved in the two groups. The Cochrane says that a high lung volume strategy, and essentially using pressure to achieve a high lung volume strategy, requires at least two of a higher mean airway pressure than on conventional. Here comes the rationale for going 14, not 12. Okay, and in a lot of ways, I think this is what we've been influenced by. The Cochrane tells us to use a higher mean airway pressure than conventional, and I think the cynic in me still believes that neonatologists are so scared of pressure that going too above conventional is a way of us giving a higher mean airway pressure but not giving too much pressure. You know, it's like a compromise. I feel good about what I'm doing. And weaning FO2 before mean airway pressure, and that's very important because mean airway pressure equals lung volume equals FO2, oxygen, and therefore your FO2 needs. So if you want to maintain lung volume, you want to wean your FO2 first. That shows you your lungs are improving rather than the other way around. And then you can use an alveolar pregnant. These were rarely used in most of the trials. But this definition doesn't tell us absolutely what mean airway pressure to use. So we'll come back to our baby, where we have, by definition, conformed so far with the Cochrane requirement for a high lung volume strategy. But we're not really in. So now let's go back and ask ourselves what we understand about physiology. Because maybe understanding physiology will help us find the right mean airway pressure. And this is a well-reproduced figure, isn't it? We all know this. You know? Again, it's another Canadian figure. That there is a range of lung volumes and pressures that we are trying to target. And they are the volumes where you will avoid overdistension and you avoid atelectasis and de-recruitment. And ideally, you will optimise your minute ventilation and oxygenation. And it's incumbent upon us to target here The absolute numbers aren't important. It's getting to this volume state that's going to be important. Okay? Having a single mean airway pressure approach, saying I will always do this, doesn't mean you will be there in every incursion, because when you go onto the oscillator from conventional, you could have been right down here, you could have been here, you could have been theoretically right up here, especially if you haven't done a measure of volume like an X-ray. Okay, so if you are here and you go to above, you could move into here theoretically. If you're here and you go to above, you won't make any difference to your baby. And if you're here and you go to above, you're worse. And if you're here and you go to above, you would expect to be the same. So now we need to think about how we can utilise this dynamic interrelation, which is defined by the baby, not the clinician or copper. And again, we know that PEEP and surfactant avoid atelectasis. We need to apply enough pressure to allow the lung to stay to recruit and not collapse during expiration. And if we take a lung and we apply a series of different PEEPs to the lung, we can see this concept of recruitment that occurs. This is recruitment that's not uniform because of the heterogeneity of the diseased lung due to the different disease, different alveoli having different degrees of disease, different mechanics in different parts of the lung, and the gravitational effect of lung disease. So here this is again from a non-neonatal set of CTs, but you can see that here at zero PEEP we have some parts of the lung engaging in gas exchange and a lot that are collapsed, and as we increase our mean airway pressure, we start to recruit more and more of the lung till we get to the point where the lung is recruited and then it moves into a state of overdistension. Okay? And on an oscillator, essentially our mean airway pressure is a PEEP change, isn't it? It's a static change. On a conventional ventilator, pressure volume doing this, but on an oscillator it's doing this. So if you make a little change, you'll get another static change. And here's some data from our work where we did do a series of mean airway pressure changes and we measured lung volume, and you can see the overall relationship that we define has that relationship that is consistent with what we'd expect to see in the lung, this sigmoidal relationship where initially you have very, very few, you'll have very, very little volume change occurring when you engage a pressure change because the lung is essentially de-recruited. Because it is de-recruited, it has low compliance. It's going to take a lot of pressure to initiate a volume change. Then suddenly you get to this point where the sign changes and the lung starts to recruit or change volume very quickly. This is the lower inflection point of the lung, isn't it? And then you'll continue to recruit the lung. You'll get to a point where suddenly you get very little volume change for your pressure change. Now you're overdistending this lung. But the lung isn't a linear organ. It has hysteresis. And as I said earlier, hysteresis means as the lung deflates, it'll behave differently than the way it inflates. And as we take the lung down in pressure now, we can see that it isn't deflating the same way it's inflating. The lung volume is being maintained to a much lower applied pressure than it was in the way it was changing during the recruitment phase. And the pressure that actually causes the lung to collapse is much lower than the pressure we needed to get the lung to inflate. And this is something we could adapt and utilise at the bedside. So this is the closing pressure of the lung. The closing pressure of the lung here is 4, the opening pressure was 16. And again, you can see this concept of hysteresis. For any pressure you apply, there are a series of lung volumes you can achieve. It's incumbent on us to find the right volume for the pressure that we want, and therefore the right pressure that gives the right volume.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
On the previous slide, or even in this one, you are looking at a very friendly lung where the compliance or the point that you are able to inflate is more homogeneous.
This is a very unfriendly lung, I would put it to you. Yeah.
More.
No, this is not the lung that we're ventilating with a baby with. This is, you talk to a PICU consultant or an adult intensivist, when they see ARDS, they see real lung disease. We see weak ARDS, essentially, compared to what they see, you know. So this is a really nasty atelectatic lung here.
But my question is, when you try to achieve the best inflation, you may still have scenarios that at that pressure there are already some ovaries that are
Exactly, you've just preempted a
And my
couple of
question
slides
is,
ahead. So
from the clinical and whatever measure we can do with the bedside machines, how do we know exactly where we are on the best inflation, knowing that some areas could be not totally and some one may start to be over
so
on the safe side?
we don't, but what we need to understand is that we have two processes here. The first stage is we need to recruit the lung. So recruiting the lung is taking it to a point where as much alveolar as we can is engaging in gas exchange. The next phase is to find the best mean airway pressure that will maintain the recruitment and avoid the overdistension that may be there present in the lung. And you can see here that right down here, if we the lung is very heterogeneous in its volume state. Yeah, some of the lung is totally collapsed; it's whited out. Some of the lung is black, which means it can engage in gas exchange. This is a very difficult lung to ventilate because the pressure that lung, part of the lung needs is different from the pressure that part of the lung needs. What we want to do is recruit the lung. So we want to try to get it to behave like this. But you're exactly right. As we walk up and start the recruitment, we will be causing overdistension in the bits of the lung that recruited earlier because the lung, every alveolar has its own lung mechanics. And all we know at the bedside is what the whole lung's doing, which is the sum of the parts. So we will have this different behaviour during the recruitment phase because the opening pressure of the lung at an alveolar level is wide. So here, what we have is some alveolar that are going to open at a pressure of 10. This is in adult data. Some which are not opening to pressures of 45. All we know at the bedside with this curve or with these curves is essentially what the mean opening pressure is. But we can't change that. That is what the lung is. The important thing is, again, the mean closing pressure of the lung is much lower. And have a look here, the shape of your distribution is different. This is pretty normally distributed. Here we have a very highly skewed distribution curve, which means once you get the lung recruited, you are going to have a group of alveoli which are going to behave more of them will behave more similarly. Yeah? So there's the key there that maybe how what we do after recruitment will be different than what we do during recruitment. And we've got two phases to our approach. And this is what Luckman has described for many, many years, this concept that to get the right mean airway pressure within atelectatic lung disease, we first need to open the lung, to recruit it and get it engaged in gas exchange. Then we need to find the closing pressure of the lung, the pressure at which that recruitment will be lost. And then we need to reopen it and go back to keeping it recruited. Okay? And this has been shown, again, on some beautiful videos here. Sorry about this, they're not all translating very, crossing over. And if people are interested, I can show them that show you the difference in having a lung recruited and de-recruited in terms of the alveolar levels. And this has been shown in numerous animal studies, most of which were done by Anton in his youth with Luckman, and also from Peter Rimmelsberger and many others, that have shown that there is you can achieve better gas exchange and less lung injury in animal studies, irrespective of mode of ventilation, by using the open lung approach, which is essentially a way of recruitment and then targeting the pressure that keeps recruitment there. So it's achieving recruitment, it's identifying the lowest pressure that then will maintain that recruitment, and by definition, therefore avoiding overdistension as well. But it's a journey, you can't get there quickly, you have to take the lung to a state where you will be transiently overdistending something. And we do that by exploiting hysteresis and exploiting the interaction between people, mean airway pressure and lung recruitment. Can this occur in babies? So does it just occur in animals or can it occur in two-legged animals as well? And we have evidence from the Dutch group and from us that the relationship between mean airway pressure and lung volume, in this case with EI, electrical impedance tomography, in this case with RIP, in preterm infants and term infants, is exactly like the pressure-volume relationship we see in all of the free slides and all of those sort of things. there is a relationship in inflation or the recruitment phase consistent with a sigmoidal inflation curve, and there is hysteresis such that the lung volume is better and the closing pressure of the lung will be lower after you've achieved recruitment. What this tells us, because we don't have either of these tools currently as bedside tools for measuring volume, is that the pressure-volume relationship of the lung can be mapped at the bedside, and we can get information about the baby to help us guide recruitment of mean airway pressure if we have the tools to read the map. So it comes down now to what tools do we have to read the map, which is volume. The simplest tool will be oxygenation, won't it? Because we know that pressure equals volume and volume equals oxygenation. So oxygenation is the simplest tool. And here in this baby, we did a series of mean airway pressure steps. So we started at 14, and we might discuss again why Anton does it slightly differently, which is a perfectly logical way to do it too. I think they both work. We started at 14. We said we weren't good enough. We said we believe this baby has a pathophysiology consistent with atelectasis, active HMD, and that our clinical judgment is that this is due to a primary parenchymal lung disease. So we did a series of pressure steps. We went to 16. FO2 got a bit better. Our SATs got a bit better. So we target a SATs range of 90 to 94 on our unit because that's what everyone does in Melbourne, and that's kind of like, as I call it, the UN approach to how to interpret all the saturation targets, right? So we target 90 to 94 preductally. So the saturations are improving, we're able to wean our FO2, so we kept going up. Our saturations continued to improve and we're able to wean our FO2 more. We're learning from the baby here. The likely thing that is causing this is we're engaging more alveolar in gas exchange, right? We are recruiting the lung. We then got to a pressure of 20. We're now in 50% oxygen. We did a blood gas, and you can see there's an improvement in FO2 improvement in PaO2 at a lower FO2. Our saturations are still in our target range, but our CO2 has started to go up and we've kept delta P constant. What's possibly happening now? Yeah, there's a clue here we might be over-distending, right? Because if our delta P is the same and our CO2 is getting worse, it's got to be our compliance which has changed. We had recruitment occurring here and presumably an improvement in compliance. Now we think the compliance might be getting worse. And the only way that would be happening physiologically is if we're starting to over-distend them. And as I said to the Calgary guys when we were talking about this the other day, because we're on my unit, the last mean airway pressure step is always the one you shouldn't have gone to. So, so I went up one more, and you can see here, just by one, and again, blood gas, we can see a CO2 is getting much worse, and these aren't actually real blood gases, they're extracted out of the neotrem, so just getting worried that we're doing a lot of blood gases. We had a neotrem running in this, and which is an old way of getting real-time blood gases from an umbilical catheter, and you get blood gases every 10 seconds. So, but when I put it up with the neotrem waveform, people get confused because they can't see it, so I've just extracted out of them. So we now see we're in the same FO2 and our SATs are dropping and our CO2 is increasing. Now we're staying about 2 minutes at each step in this baby. So we're going quite quickly relative to what we normally do at the bedside. And I'll show some data as to why we should do that. And now we have, I think, firm evidence that the increase in mean airway pressure is detrimental to this baby. We have got some bang for our buck. We have changed mean airway pressure and got the baby better. But now we're making the baby worse. There is no benefit to this baby in further increasement in mean airway pressure. And this is true patient-titrated ventilation, isn't it? Where the number is being dictated by the baby and information we get. So there is no value in going any more in mean airway pressure. We're just going to make the baby worse, and we'll start to get cardiovascular instability eventually as well. So the question is, what do we do now? We know that we have taken this lung probably from this state up to here somewhere. The best recruitment we can get, and now we're over-distending. This process of going up the inflation limb is a process where recruitment never stops. It'll almost certainly be still happening in some of the lung, even at this point where we're starting to see over-distension. And there is theoretically no point in this stage of going up in mean airway pressure where we take away every cause of lung injury. There will still be some parts of the lung exposed to different forms of lung injury. We know mathematically, physiologically and logically that if we exploit hysteresis and we go in the deflation, because all of the lung is doing the same thing now, it's essentially recruited or over-distended, we should have greater alveolar stability because we've got uniformity. As I say, this is a bit like we've now got an underground like the underground in Japan where everyone works together, as opposed to here where we've got like our Melbourne public transport network, which is chaos at the train station. Everyone's going where they want. And the opening pressures will be greater than the collapsing pressures, so we can exploit this. So the thing to do would be to now start coming down in mean airway pressure, because we should be able to maintain the benefit of recruitment at a lower pressure here if hysteresis exists. So we did this, come down to 18, and we actually were able to wean our FO2 a little bit more. And we could talk maybe in question time about that. And we saw an improvement in oxygenation. And this is a phenomenon that lots of people have reported. We're now in 40%. We kept weaning, and our SATs are still good. We're dropping our mean airway pressure, okay, but we're still able to maintain the best we could get, which is this. This is our benchmark. We're not going to get this baby to air. This baby, at this point in time, we can get to 40%. So now we'll find the mean airway pressure that the lowest mean airway pressure the baby can stay in 40% for. We go down 12, still looking pretty good. Now this is now, you notice, the same as unconventional. We go to 10, we're still 40%, but our SATs look like they might be dropping. Maybe we're starting to de-recruit this lung now, getting to the point where most of the alveoli are de-recruiting. We go down 2 more, and now we have had to increase our oxygenation, and our SATs are still dropping, and our near trend is showing that our PaO2 is worse than when we're on conventional. So this is not a good thing. High frequencies, we don't want, this is not the mean airway pressure we want to stay on. But we've shown that the baby's collapsed, is atelectatic now. As I said earlier, this means that we have found the cliff, the volume state where de-recruitment is now the prominent process. But we've walked off that cliff. So we now need to come back. But we've done this process, we've learned a lot about the baby in quite a short period of time, haven't we? We've learned what mean airway pressure will recruit the lung and what mean airway pressures we can use to maintain the best oxygenation and outcome after recruitment. So we've mapped this lung with these parameters. And again, both from the work that Anton's group have done and our group have done, we've shown that saturation or markers, bedside markers of oxygenation correlate to the pressure-volume relationship. So we can use oxygenation generally as a de facto measure of lung volume. And you can see here from the Dutch graph of pressure versus a marker of oxygenation during the open lung recruitment and closing pressure finding manoeuvre, this behaviour looks very like the PB relationship, and we saw a similar thing in older babies. So that tells us that oxygenation can be used to reliably identify the point of total lung compliance or point of overdistension or the maximum pressure or the opening pressure, depending on what you want to call it, and also the point of essential de-recruitment in the lung on the deflation. But SpO2 is not able to delineate very, very fine changes in lung volume that might be occurring between these 2 points. So the only thing, SpO2 will tell you when you've got recruitment, it'll tell you when you've got overdistension, and it'll tell you when you've got de-recruitment. It won't tell you between those 2 points what the right mean airway pressure might necessarily be. Because, by definition, to get a change in FO and oxygenation that is appreciable at the bedside, we have to go off the cliff. And it would be kind of nice if we knew we were about to go off the cliff. So then but we'll come back to the baby. What do we do now? There's no value staying here. But we've done all this work. We've learnt from our patient, and we've learnt that if we go up to a mean airway pressure of 20, we will get lung recruitment. We don't need to step up again. We've taken the lung through. We know what we need. We can just go straight back up to that recruiting pressure, that opening pressure. But we also know that whilst that'll give us recruitment, it's not where we want to stay. Because firstly, you might start to get overdistension. And secondly, there's no benefit being up here when we actually got a better or as good a benefit right down here, the lower mean airway pressure. And not only is that good for the baby mechanically, it's potentially better from an injury point of view, at least theoretically, but for a neonatologist who is adverse to pressure by our own sort of religion of it, it makes more sense too, right? So we go up there till we see our response back again. We've recovered the baby by re-recruitment, and now the question is, where do we go now? And this is something to discuss, but we could pick any of these settings theoretically, because anywhere from 18 down to 10 gave us good oxygenation, didn't it? The question is, what do we pick? And I put it to you that the safest place to stand on a cliff is not at the very edge, right? We all naturally stand a few steps back. And this is the logic here about how to pick the right mean airway pressure. So most of the work has suggested, and most people have shown, that going 2 to 4 centimetres of water back from the closing pressure is going to put you at a safe place to be in the lowest practical pressure you can achieve. And again, that's this principle of just standing a bit back from the cliff, because all we've done now is map this baby's lung at this point in time. And all we've got is a measure of how the general lung is behaving. The disease will change, the baby will change, and the pressure-volume relationship will change. And the cliff may change. There could be erosion.
Well, but I guess you're doing all of this without surfactant.
Yeah.
So then,
Excellent. Then, and that's the big thing, right?
you said you're going to change the lung compliance if you give it.
Yeah.
So you have to do this all over again.
Yeah, and what will happen if you give surfactant? Will the cliff move higher, or will you get more space? You'll get more space. You actually will build more space between you and the cliff. But your pressure, the mean airway pressure that is right in the future is not the mean airway pressure that's always going to be right now, and vice versa. Because you will do things and the baby will do things. So, definitely in the Netherlands, I would do it this way at this point in time.
Is that so because you open, so then you can disperse the surfactant? Or
That's a theoretical argument, that by opening the lung up, you are going to get better distribution of surfactant. There's also a
But then you
clinical...
need to have a chest x-ray before to make sure your ETT is in a good position.
Why? But that's a different entity. That's a different question. Yeah.
One quick question is, that looks nice, is the ideal word. You might have a baby that from the first square, you increase them up to 16, and when you increase to 16, you see that the HFOV is the same, 0.8. The SAT is 94, but the CO2 is 65.
Yeah.
Then you are on track.
So you need to learn, the whole point is the numbers here are irrelevant. It's about how you interpret the information. So when I do this, I say during the recruitment phase, my definition of no more benefit for the baby is 2 mean airway pressure steps where I get no benefit in oxygenation or evidence of recruitment, or over 2 mean airway pressure steps, I'm seeing a negative effect on the baby, and therefore I'm probably overextending it. So if I started at 14 and I went to 16 and the baby got worse, the interpretation there is that I might already be overextending this lung, okay? Which is why when I show you some data from Anton's group, they initiate high frequency at 8, isn't it? So irrespective of conventional mean, they will go on to mean airway pressure of 8, knowing that that is logically going to be too low. But at least you know where you are from a volume state. Part of what, when we go on to high frequencies, we don't know what the volume state of the lung is. Which is why, as a general rule, when you're on an oscillator and the baby is going bad on you in one way or another, it could be a mechanical thing, but if it is a change in lung mechanics or lung disease, you don't know necessarily if you're overextending or collapsing a lung, because physiologically at the bedside you get the same outcome, drop in oxygenation, rise in CO2 levels. So if you don't know what to do, make a change in your mean airway pressure. Probably the safest change in that case would be to go down first, okay, and then watch what happens and learn. So this is an interactive road, and it requires an understanding of what's going on rather than a cookbook approach. But yes, if this baby we went to 14 and we went to 16 and the FiO2 got worse and the baby's CO2 got higher, and you didn't think it was a mechanical event, then there is no benefit going up. You're doing harm. Back off. But at least you know what to do. Now you go the other way.
How always cheap.
So, well, I might move on and we'll come back to talking about that because it'll depend a bit on the patient.
I just want to ask you about the opening pressure. Because we saw the CO2 increasing at 20, would you argue that could we be safer to open the lungs a point lower? Because there was already signs of overextension there with the CO2.
Well, there wasn't at 18, but there was at 20, right? But I guess at the moment, there is actually not much data on using lung mechanics measures to guide the open lung. And I'll just show you some stuff on this now to say that potentially using the two together will be useful. Now, at the bedside, we don't have true gas monitoring levels. And, yes, I would probably not go any higher, but I'm trying to show you an example. All of the definitions, all the descriptions of using the open lung approach to refining the right mean airway pressure are based solely on using oxygenation as your measure of lung volume. And I'm just trying to build an argument that these other measures are useful parameters to bear in mind, but at the end of the day, oxygenation is the measure you need to use. Mainly because in high frequency, the monitoring tools we have for PA CO2 and compliance are quite crude compared to unconventional ventilation. We don't have a true measure of PA CO2. But yes, you could argue not to go any higher. You've already got recruitment. Yeah? The key thing is we're not staying at these pressures. So yes, we're exposing the lung to overextension, but we're not doing it for hours. I would put it to you that in this case, if we just stayed at 14 and waited and waited and waited and waited and waited, we're still a high lung volume Cochrane sufficient group. But I reckon a brief period of this is more dangerous to the baby than a long period of this. That's my take on it.
Less dangerous.
Less dangerous, sorry.
Just to keep in mind, it was 2 minutes, isn't it?
Yeah, we're doing 2-minute steps.
It's not original.
And I'll,
What's a good reason for not administering surfactant?
all right, we'll finish the talk and then we'll talk about this. Okay.
They're very persistent on this.
They are. This is just like, where's the Curasurf guys? In this case, for this preterm baby, 2 minutes. A couple of minutes at each step, give or take, because it's never exactly 2 minutes. But again, I'm going to show you some data why that's not always the case. Because you're going to be physiologically enlightened if you do this. So in the end, we went to 11, which was 3 above the closing pressure. And here we are, we're still in our 40% oxygen, we're in our SATs range, and our CO2 now is where we want it to be. So, do we have any clinical evidence of this approach? The very first report is in the late 90s from Geneva, and I will stress to you that none of these reports are randomised controlled trials. They are all single units describing their experience using this as a mode of practice and comparing it to what they were doing before. So Peter Rimmensberger described in the late 90s and compared to the historical group of conventionally ventilated babies this lung volume optimisation or open lung approach, where if the baby was in more than 40% pre-surfactant, that being their criteria for giving surfactant, they would first intention oscillate 1 to 2 centimetre water steps every couple of minutes until they either got to an FO2 less than 40%, 0.4, or a maximum mean airway pressure of 25. So they wouldn't go over 25. They then decreased until they found the lowest mean airway pressure that maintained that FO2 benefit. Okay, and they found compared to their historical controls, less ventilator days, lower oxygen dependency, less chronic lung disease. Those outcome measures are you have to take with a grain of salt when you've got a historical comparison. But what you can infer is that as they didn't report an increase in adverse events, that it appears that at least transient high mean airway pressure exposure was tolerated in these babies. So then, my animation's gone totally crazy here. So then Anton reported in 2006 a similar strategy of lung volume optimization using a similar set of pressure steps and then a similar set of pressure decreasing steps, but no maximum mean airway pressure. Yeah. Less conservative than the Swiss. Yeah. So the 25 centimetre ceiling wasn't in place, and a more aggressive intention for improvement in oxygenation with an aim to try to find the mean airway pressure that brought your FO2 down to 25% or less before surfactant. So a much more aggressive strategy. And they found that using such an approach, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but 75% of babies could be brought down to less than 25% or less pre-surfactant, and in almost 100% all could be brought down to less than 30% in first intention high frequency. But some of your babies weren't day one of life. You had some that were 72 hours or so of life because you're a referral centre as well. But again, with a proven atelectatic lung disease.
But then if you achieve this FIO2, what is the criteria to be surfactant?
Well, that's another question which I'm not going to discuss. So again, I'm probably on Anton's point of view, and you do give surfactant, and I think the logic, do you want to explain the logic rather than me explain your logic? Because I agree with it.
Well, this is one of the reasons. If you would give every baby surfactant, or maybe just a selection of babies, and conventional also, if you have a mean airway pressure times FI2 as a sort of a, if it's below this or above that, then I will give surfactant. It's actually one of the reasons why we first recruit the lung and actually see what is the degree of lung disease in this baby. And this baby actually qualifies to our protocol to get surfactant. And if you just put surfactant in there, then you should give every baby surfactant. So in our unit, it's if the mean airway pressure times the FI2 is about 2.5, so mean airway pressure 10, 25% of oxygen, then we would give the baby surfactant. If it's below, then we would not give surfactant, just wait and see. The reason for giving surfactant, because Peter Ribbensberger actually doesn't give surfactant anymore. He just leaves the baby down there for a couple of days and reads the pressures down and then extubates. He says he got very good results. We are a very aggressive extubation center also. So these kind of babies actually, we recruit the lung, give the surfactant, wean down aggressively the mean airway pressure. As soon as we hit 8, as soon as the water, we pull the tube an hour later and put the baby back on CPAP. So it's sort of a extended in-shore procedure, but we don't want to leave these babies on 28/6 until we get the X-ray, which usually takes half an hour, and then before we see the X-ray on the screen, it's usually 45 minutes. And during that time, this baby is exposed to the 28s every few seconds because it's unconventional. Or leave the baby on a low mean airway pressure on a high frequency, which we know is not the optimal way to treat these babies if you want to get the full effect of lung protection. So this is some of the reasons why we opted to, as soon as the tube is in there, we don't bag them, we put them on the oscillators, recruit the lung, stabilize the lung, takes the X-ray, and then treat surfactant and we down the pressure.
So,
What's the role of steroids when you can avoid intubating and ventilating? You don't use steroids.
Sure, this is the approach that is used in those babies that fail CPAP.
Yeah.
So you could call us relatively aggressive in the way we recruit in the primary approach, but we're equally aggressive that it's forbidden to intubate a baby in the delivery room unless you need to resuscitate the baby.
so we'll take it as a given that we wouldn't intubate de novo.
And the same is you need to extubate. If you don't extubate in a few hours, you have something to explain and hand over. Why didn't you extubate? Well, I was sleeping, when I was sure, or when maybe you could re-intubate the baby. So it's the package. As soon as the baby's head is born, you think of a lot of things, but we actually think a lot about the lung. You have to be lung protective in every action that you take, and this means CPAP, failure, recruits, surfactant, extubates. And this is the whole package.
And do you see how this is, it's a recurrent theme, isn't it? Sorry?
Surfactant or ventilation?
In terms of lung injury, well, both are, I think, lung protective strategies. Now you're talking about should you do one before the other, or maybe at the same time, and this depends on, like I said, if you are a prophylactic surfactant treatment center, then the surfactant is already in there at the time the baby fails. So this is a different approach. But if you're a rescue treatment surfactant, as most of us are, based on the evidence out there, then I think that if I would like to avoid conventional or non-recruitable ventilation for even 10 or 15 minutes. And if I do an X-ray and do a tube check before giving a surfactant, this means that I would not leave the baby on a low settings of this oscillating a collapsed lung, which a lot of oxygen you need to put in this baby. So I want to be lung protected. I want to do both. Be lung protected during ventilation and give us surfactant.
These are not mutually exclusive events. You know, surfactant deficiency is a part of the disease. The mechanical properties of the collapsing lung are part of the disease, and these are two treatments for the same fundamental disease. And I think that there are other units which will give surfactant first before doing lung recruitment. My take on this is that yes, you may get an improvement in the baby's state doing an open lung procedure, but you still haven't changed. You've modulated the disease the baby has, but you haven't changed the fact the baby has RDS. And surfactant is a proven therapy for RDS. Optimising ventilation will be a beneficial therapy for RDS. The two should be used together.
Could you please tell us if you care for 23, 24, 25, 26 meters, maybe? Because that affects it.
So in Australia, 33% of babies under 25 weeks are still put on an oscillator in Australia in 2012 from our database. And we are probably the most aggressive, non-invasive place around the traps, I reckon, in terms of our sort of enthusiasm for it. So we are still using this, particularly in these babies.
The Netherlands babies there and the Switzerland's babies, you know, if they were 22, 23 weeks.
No, we don't do
You don't have
22,
23.
23. It's 24 weeks up. So this approach we are using is for the 24-week up. But this also includes no intubation in the living room and early extubation after surfactant. So I'm not got any experience with 22 and 23 weeks, which probably is different in terms of aggressive extubation.
And the failure here is more than 40% or more than?
Sorry?
You consider CPAP failed more than 40% requirement?
I don't have the exact number in my head, but if you look at it, 24 weeks, most of these babies actually, unless there's no antiviral steroids, it's different depending on the individual and the circumstances prenatally also. But most of these babies actually do fine on nasal CPAP. They get into trouble after the RDS period, or apnea or sepsis, and then get into this ventilation time, and then you get into this chronic lung disease issue. To me, and we're not going to discuss this, this actually is a much more interesting population to target and to do a trial in, because all the trials have focused on the first 72 hours. The RDS baby actually is the most easy one to recruit and to treat with surfactant. And they don't get into trouble anymore. These aren't the babies that we're worried about. We're worried about the babies that get into trouble in the second week of life with inflammation, pneumonia, apnea, necrotizing enterocolitis. And then you start ventilating these babies. I would love to do a trial randomizing these babies to a lung protective oscillation strategy versus a conventional, much more difficult way to ventilate these heterogeneously diseased lungs.
Those babies, this isn't necessarily the right way to be lung protective. So I could, in the interest, I'm told we have to go quicker. I can plug a paper that Peter Dargaville and I wrote, a review paper on lung protective ventilation, which highlights that in the modern era, we have this new group, which are the ones we see a lot of chronic lung diseases, and they are not the ones that we are managing with acute atelectasis in early life. They're managed on CPAP, then they get sicker. And they will not be managed with this strategy. This is a strategy for one particular disease, and you need to understand that disease, which is profound atelectasis. When you have more inflammatory mechanical processes going on, your approach will be different. But George is going to get mad at me.
How do you know there's no damage when you're...
Sorry? What?
How do you know there's no damage to lungs when you're using such high pressures to recruit the lungs?
Okay, you're going to talk about lung injury later, right?
Yeah.
You can be just as good at damaging the lungs with low pressure. You can be just as good at damaging the lungs with the pressure you think is the right pressure. Okay? At the end of the day, at least physiologically, if you look at the pressure-volume relationship and you look at the way the lung behaves at an alveolar level, having the lowest pressure that maintains recruitment will give you the less shear force movement in the lung and maintain an end expiratory volume in that alveolar. So it should be theoretically the most lung protective. We don't have an RCT of this with lung injury as an outcome. It would probably be unethical to do that to a certain degree, right? Because there's a degree of usability. But in the animal models, every animal model that has used acute atelectasis and open lung has shown less lung injury than you without using these approaches. The difficulty is changing a bit of our thinking. This is what I was saying. I think staying 12 hours at a mean airway pressure, which generally is not maintaining recruitment, but it makes us feel happier because it's a lower mean airway pressure, is more injurious than a transient couple of minute exposure to a high pressure and a transient couple of minute exposure to a low pressure, which we know is causing volume state change. And if it gets you off a ventilator quicker, then that's got to be a good thing. The idea is not to be on a ventilator. But can I give you a randomized controlled trial in JAMA or in New England? No.
So generally, what's the time frame that you guys do these?
Excellent. I might move on and answer that for you. So,
I find that we do take surfactant, but we don't necessarily do lung recruitment always. So, yeah.
So my indication to redoing a recruitment manoeuvre is when changing the pressure is when I think the baby has changed. Does that make sense? And that my pressures are now not the right one for that baby. So again, it's not I must come and do this every 4 to 6 hours or every 12 hours or whatever. It's got to be guided by the disease and the baby. And that's somewhat biased by the fact that we run a lot of different lung diseases in our units. We see different things.
But it's also a mental thing.
Yeah.
People don't like to change if the numbers are right. It took a lot of effort in our unit to say, well, maybe your mean air pressure of 12 and you have 25% of oxygen. So why would you change? Well, because 12 might be too high. You might have achieved the same with 8. 8 means extubation. So at least we said every 12 hours. You need to challenge this lung and go down with the pressure to make sure that the 12 is still necessary.
In preterm.
In preterm.
Preterm,
But it's
early lung disease.
No, but it's the concept.
Yeah, the concept's the same.
The concept is the same with the older baby, although the practical approach and how you do it is slightly different.
You may do it less frequency in a really sick MAS baby where you know the disease will take longer to change.
I'm just coming back to your statement of 24 weeks. So are you saying you do different strategy on 23 weeks or you don't resuscitate?
No.
We do not resuscitate 23 weeks.
But we do. But we definitely don't have time for this discussion in this workshop. You can take Anton out the back later and do what you want to him if you haven't.
I'll be happy to talk about this.
This is now some data on peak trials on convention. So in other words, one approach would have been in this baby to say that peak of 5 is simply not.
Yep, I think you're absolutely right. We don't have good peak trials in modern ventilation strategies. I would love to do one. I just struggle to convince people in Australia that doing a peak trial is something we should do. And over morning tea, I can tell you a joke about why that can't happen in Melbourne, because the two big units that I would deal with both have gone beyond equipoise. They know what the right PEEP is. One unit is 6 and one unit's 8. To me, that's an answer for a trial straight off. But that's a different. And I can tell you in a lamb, I can do this on conventional and get the same outcome. And hopefully this afternoon in the pigs, we will have time to do this on conventional and do the same thing. The mode of ventilation doesn't matter. You can recruit the lung. The risk in conventional is that obviously you're going to take the lung through much tidal changes, bigger tidal changes, and you will take the lung up into overdistension and inflation much quicker than on the oscillator. Yeah, but I think in conventional it is entirely reasonable. The adult people do it in conventional.
Maybe they said lung recruitment. We changed it to lung optimization. Some other terminology. People appreciate that we can go up, go down, and it doesn't matter which you go.
But again, I've discussed this a bit. Once you put the word optimal in, that is such a nebulous term. And I can tell you, everywhere I go, everyone is optimal in their ventilation, and everyone is protective in their ventilation. Okay.
But I'll discuss this when I talk tomorrow morning also.
So George is getting really anxious here. So to move on, why we do this manoeuvre, we can see our compliance changes. So as we recruit the lung, overdistend the lung, and exploit hysteresis, we will change lung mechanics. And I'm going to go very quickly through this. Basically, our lung compliance is changing because of the change in volume state and other things that are happening. And when we have looked at this, during these high frequency open lung manoeuvres, here in a little lamb, where we've gone along the deflation curve and we've defined it by oxygenation, here you can see the closing pressure of the lung where we fall off the cliff. We've seen lung volume, and what we're seeing with EIT is that we start to get heterogeneous de-recruitment, which is what we'd expect. When we look at markers of lung mechanics, tidal volume and lung reactance using forced oscillation measures, we can see that these parameters very closely define the point where heterogeneity of de-recruitment is becoming predominant and the cliff occurs. And in fact, there's a U-shaped relationship such that a couple of steps back from the cliff is where these markers are often best. And this suggests that maybe adding in these markers that we now have on the ventilator might help us know we're about to step off the cliff and make those of us who are anxious about atelectasis at least transiently less anxious. And both, again, from Anton's group, showed here TCO2 and EIT in measured tidal volume as we go from from a low pressure up and from a high pressure down after recruitment. You can see that there's this relationship in these parameters. Sorry, this is just your deflation data, my mistake. So this is going from a high pressure then down to the closing pressure. You can see this U-shaped relationship in tidal volume and this this U-shaped relationship in CO2 where you get an optimal point for both, which occurred a little bit above the closing pressure. And we describe that too, both with DCO2, tidal volume and TCO2, that these parameters in some but not all babies would tell you what the best pressure to apply the lung at was before you stepped over it. So I think having them running at once is a good thing. But because they're pretty crude markers, I tend to have them all running. And when I do this, I'm writing all of my numbers down. Every step, mean airway pressure step, FiO2, saturation, heart rate, blood pressure, DCO2, all of that, every step. So because firstly, I can't remember what happened. And secondly, it then allows me to work it all out and know what I'm doing. So we've come to the conclusion that, and again, I've lost all my animation, but basically this is the range where oxygen saturation after recruitment was about the same, and this is the closing pressure of the lung here, okay? And this is the point where each of our lung mechanics markers were optimised, and we could narrow down the Allison-Freese range of the safe window to be this range where you kind of got the best of everything, the best oxygenation, the best lung mechanics on the deflation limit, so a narrower sort of Freese window. Again, it's all been lost, and I think in time I'll move on to the questions that were asked. So here is some more work from Anton's group, looking at the time it took after a mean airway pressure change at each step to get to a new steady state lung volume in their preterm babies, 15 preterm babies during the open month. Okay, so this is the mathematically calculated time constant from an exponential equation. So there's some issues around mass, but it's generally about right. And you can see that the one time constant was quite quick and influenced by whether you're in the recruiting phase, where you've still got lung units recruiting, or the deflation phase, where they're all behaving the same. It was much quicker in the deflation stage, and it was influenced by giving surfactant. So in the pre-surfactant lung, roughly the time you need at each mean airway pressure step is about 2 minutes. That's the take-home message here. But that is in a preterm lung with a compliance problem and not a resistance problem, and it's a little baby. We looked at our babies predominantly with MAS and found that the time to get to stable lung volume, and this data is still not published, because the person who did it decided to become a doctor, the time to get to stable lung volume at each mean airway pressure step, and we stay 10 minutes in my study at each step, was much, much longer in the term baby mixed heterogeneity sort of lung disease. And in some cases, there were babies even at 10 minutes who had not yet got a stable lung volume. And mathematically computing this, sometimes we needed many minutes to get to stable lung volume. What this means is how you adapt your approach to recruitment needs to be dependent on the time constants of the lung. And if you go too quickly in a baby, which is going to take a long time to get a change, you won't see a change, and you might go from 14 to 16 to 18 and nothing happens, when really the fact is you've just gone too quickly and you haven't allowed the lung volume to change. So the time you stay at each pressure step will be dictated by by the disease. This is, again, some work from Anton's group. I think these are the same 15 babies repeatedly, right? Yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Salami.
And here is a description of what happened to the closing pressure of the lung after lung recruitment. So here the baby had lung recruitment, and you can see the deflation limb. You can see the optimum pressure is going to be around here. Then the babies were given surfactant, and again the deflation limb was remapped, and you can see that it totally changes as you would expect if you gave surfactant, because you change lung volume and lung mechanics. And what happens here is that now the closing pressure of the lung may be different, and all that work you've done has changed. So as we discussed earlier, what do I do here? Well, if the baby has got better, then you would wean the mean, because you'd expect the baby to need a lower mean. You've given surfactant, it's a good thing to do. If the baby's the same, you would expect the baby to have got better in terms of lung mechanics, so why not try weaning the mean if the baby's good, correct? And that's what you were saying earlier. If the baby's got worse in terms of its state, it may be that you're now over-distending its lung as well. If in doubt, you don't re-recruit, you would go down in this case. Yeah? But the key point here is that you've changed the volume, the numbers you have generated will change as the baby changes, and you need to adapt to that, and it may be that you need to redo your manoeuvre one way or another.
David,
Yeah.
could you just go back a couple of slides for a second?
Yeah.
My reading, returning for normalized mean area pressure, 75 centimeters of water.
No, this is, I've gone very quickly. This is normalised, it's in percentage, and it looks better on my computer. So this is not 75 centimetres of water. Because when you do this work as a researcher, the actual sets of mean airway pressures you have are different in every baby. So you can't plot the raw data. So what we all do is we normalise it. So generally what we do is we normalise, we usually call 0 centimetres, the closing pressure lung, the final one, and we call 100% the top one we went to. So it provides a normalisation, a descriptive of behaviour rather than absolute values. Because one baby may have gone 2 or 3 centimetres up and 4 down, and one may have gone from 12 to 30 and then down. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I apologise. And again, all of them you'll see both from Anton's and our group, the volumes are normalised too. They're not in mils or anything. So this is the most important slide. You can do a lot of harm changing mean airway pressure in the babies that don't want to have their mean airway pressure changed. Okay? This is a disease, this is a manoeuvre for recruitable lung disease. It's not a manoeuvre for non-recruitable lung disease. And the analogy I give is I don't give gentamicin to gram-positive infections. Okay? So if you have a lung disease which won't respond to recruitment, you shouldn't be trying to recruit it. What are you going to do? You're going to blow that lung up and affect cardiovasculature. So do not try this in pulmonary hyperplasia, at least unless, in some cases it might work, but this is, I think, a relative contraindication. Congenital diaphragmatic hernias, as a general rule, especially if you're not familiar with using lung recruitment manoeuvres, aggressive ones like this, it shouldn't be used because you would expect it to be a non-recruitable lung. And primary pulmonary hypertension isn't a lung pathology, it's a pulmonary vascular pathology. You're going to make the pulmonary vascular worse. Definitely that term baby with pulmonary hypertension does not like a high mean airway pressure. In fact, in this disease, this is an indication for a low lung volume strategy in many cases. Doesn't mean that sometimes you don't do a pressure step, but in pulmonary hyperplasia, but we limit it in our babies to a last resort, and we do very small steps, very long periods of time. We might wait hours after each step to see what the response is. And I think if in doubt, you decrease your mean. I'm going to just go straight to the summary slide. So, in summary, optimal high frequency requires nothing more than a good understanding of respiratory physiology. In an atelectatic recruitable lung, recruitment can be individualised with an open lung approach. So it's not a cookbook approach, it's a patient-generated approach. And that is part of a general strategy of individualising your entire package of care. And we talked a bit about this with diaphragmatic hernias yesterday, that I think the outcomes we see of diaphragmatic hernias are based on the fact that, as has happened in Anton's unit, everyone is focused on doing the same thing and being conscious of what's best to do. Watch your patient, use the information the baby gives you and adapt to what you do based on what the baby tells you, and also probably you need to understand a bit about your device. And essentially, this is a Goldilocks principle. We're trying to find the ranges of volumes, mechanics and oxygenation that are just right, not too little and not too much. So There you go. We've got a lot of discussion. That's good. We went overtime with discussion, so thank you.
Okay, we just change the program a bit. We have 10 more minutes to discuss and we'll do the talk later on. So if there are more questions.
Okay. Do you want
Go
to
ahead,
keep discussing? There you go.
So, depending on your understanding of the server, you have